You notice it first in the absence of a phone call. There is no crisis waiting for you tonight. No one has written to ask whether you are awake, whether you have a moment, whether you can help them survive something that cannot possibly wait until morning. Nothing is pulling at you, and instead of relaxing, something in your chest begins to tighten. That tightening is the part you did not expect. You had imagined evenings like this for years, no emergency, no emotional weight being placed in your hands, no life temporarily depending upon your ability to remain calm. You thought the absence of demand would feel like freedom, yet now that it has arrived, your body responds as though something important has gone missing. You check the phone anyway, not because you are waiting for anyone in particular, but because checking is what your hands know how to do when the world becomes too quiet. The screen shows nothing. You set it down, move through the room, and pick it up again 11 minutes later. What has stopped is not merely a sequence of obligations. What has stopped is the mechanism by which you knew, from moment to moment, that your existence mattered. For the rescuer, being needed is never burden alone. It is also information. It tells you where you belong, what position to occupy, and why your presence is justified. Remove that information and a strange problem appears. You are still here, the room is still here, the hours ahead are still yours, but nothing outside you is explaining what you are for, and you discover that you have almost no practice inhabiting a moment that makes no request. You might call this restlessness, but restlessness is too mild. Restlessness usually contains a desire moving toward an object. This feeling has no clear object. There is only the absence of the familiar pull you were organized to answer, and the disturbing sense that without that pull, some part of you is becoming difficult to locate. So the psyche begins looking for someone to save. You remember a person you have not checked on recently. Your thumb moves toward their name before any conscious decision has formed. A perfectly reasonable explanation follows. A moment later, you are only being thoughtful. But the reaction came before the explanation. The empty space produced discomfort, and the fastest available way to end that discomfort was to become necessary again. The message would not only ask how they were, it would quietly restore you to yourself. This is what makes the rescuer identity so difficult to relinquish. It is not experienced as an identity. It is experienced as love, loyalty, generosity, and care. Those qualities are real. You did love the people you carried, and reducing all of that devotion to pathology would be another form of dishonesty. But the caring was performing a second function beneath the one you could see. It gave your day a shape. It protected you from the uncertainty of preference. It answered the question of whether you deserved to occupy space without requiring you to ask that question directly. Someone was always drowning, and a person pulling another human being from the water does not stop to wonder what they desire. Urgency suspends identity. It replaces the difficult question of who you are with the immediate question of what must be done. For a long time, this felt like strength. You were the person who could act while others collapsed. You could enter confusion and locate the next necessary step. You knew what to say during the late night call, how to interpret the silence in someone's voice, and how to carry an emotional weight without letting it appear heavy. But now there is no emergency to organize you. The competence remains, yet It has nowhere to go, and beneath it, you begin to encounter someone whose existence was postponed every time another person's need became more urgent. The silence is not neutral space waiting to be filled with hobbies. It is a room you have never fully occupied. The first thing you meet inside it is not freedom, but how little you know about yourself as a person with wants rather than functions. The question, "What do you feel like doing?" sounds simple until it is directed at you. Then something like static appears. The pause lasts slightly too long. Eventually, an answer arrives. But when you examine it, you realize that it is another task. The mind offers a task because tasks are legible. A task has a reason, an outcome, and a standard by which it can be judged. A preference has none of these protections. It cannot always explain why it exists, and because it cannot justify itself, it may initially feel as though it has no right to exist at all. This is where the language of the false self becomes too crude. The rescuer was not simply a false person covering a true one. The capacity to care, anticipate, and endure belongs to you. The problem began when this capacity became the only form of you that was permitted to enter relationships. Jung understood the persona as the face through which a person enters the social world. It is neither fraud nor essence. It allows us to function, to belong, and to become recognizable to others. Suffering begins when the ego forgets that it is wearing a face and starts believing that the face is the entire psyche. Your rescuer persona became convincing because it was built from real abilities. You could read a room before anyone spoke. You could detect the smallest alteration in someone's mood. You could anticipate collapse and adjust yourself before another person had to name what they needed. These capacities were praised so consistently that there seemed to be no reason to question them. People called you kind, strong, perceptive, and selfless. Each word sounded like recognition, but they were often recognizing what you did for them, not the person whose life made that doing possible. This is the asymmetry at the center of the role. You became extraordinarily skilled at reading other people and strangely inexperienced at reading yourself. You could feel resentment forming in someone across a table, yet remain unable to tell whether you wanted to stay at the table. When the role weakens, the unoccupied space does not feel like liberation. It feels more like unemployment. You have been made redundant from the only position through which you learn to experience yourself as valuable. The body often recognizes this before thought does. A heaviness arrives in the late afternoon. The day feels strangely unearned. Your shoulders have nothing to brace against, yet they do not know how to lower themselves. Rest does not feel restful because no sacrifice preceded it. Some people call this boredom, but boredom is an innocent word for a state that can carry real dread. The dread is not produced by the empty evening itself. It comes from the question hidden inside that evening, who are you, while no transaction of usefulness is taking place. You may have answered that question by adding something new, a project, a course, a volunteer commitment, a person whose life is complicated enough to require your sustained attention. Anything with structure can provide relief because a clear demand immediately restores orientation. There is nothing inherently wrong with these things. The important detail is the speed with which they appear. Open time is converted into obligation before you have to feel what the openness exposes. The rescuer does not merely dislike idleness. The rescuer experiences unclaimed time as psychologically dangerous. If no one needs anything, the persona receives no reflection from the world, and without that reflection, the ego begins to fear that there may be nothing behind the role. But this emptiness is not proof that nothing is there. It is what undeveloped inner life feels like when it is first given space. What has gone unused does not immediately arrive with a name, a purpose, and a confident voice. It appears faintly, almost apologetically, because faint signals were never the ones that governed your attention. Preference returns first in small forms, a slight inclination toward one thing rather than another, an interest in a subject with no practical application, a piece of music that serves no one, a wish to remain somewhere a little longer without being able to explain why. These signals are easy to miss because you were trained by intensity. Crisis was clear, distress was audible, other people's needs entered the room with force, your own inclination arrives quietly, and anything quiet was once expected to wait. This is one reason attending to yourself can feel strangely self-indulgent. It seems as though you have taken a resource intended for other people and turned it inward without authorization. The feeling is not irrational. It accurately reflects a psyche organized around the principle that attention belongs to whoever needs it most. While you were never allowed to be that person, yet preference is only the first thing hidden beneath the rescuer persona. Something more difficult waits behind it. Jung called the rejected or unlived portions of personality the shadow, but the shadow is not made only of aggression, selfishness, or socially unacceptable impulses. It also contains every human capacity that your acceptable identity could not afford to include. For the rescuer, the shadow may contain the wish to be carried. It may contain exhaustion, dependency, anger, and the desire to receive without immediately repaying. It may contain the right to disappoint someone, the wish to be approached first, or the longing to remain loved when you have nothing useful to offer. These qualities feel dangerous not because they are foreign to you, but because they contradict the identity through which belonging was secured. If you are the strong one, your need becomes a threat. If you are the understanding one, your anger becomes evidence against you. If you are the person who remains, your desire to leave begins to look like betrayal. The old role, therefore, protected more than your relationships. It protected you from meeting the parts of yourself that might have altered those relationships. As long as you remained indispensable, you never had to discover whether someone would still choose you when you were ordinary, uncertain, unavailable, or in need. There is a further complication. When rescuing stops, you do not simply lose a function, you lose a familiar way of being close to people. Consider how intimacy most often occurred in your life. Someone revealed the thing they could not tell anyone else. A crisis created an opening. You entered through that opening, listened without judgment, and became important through your ability to hold what another person could not hold alone. That closeness was real, but it was closeness organized around asymmetry. One person was exposed while the other remained useful. Their inner world became visible, while yours remained safely behind the competence required to receive it. What happens to a friendship when no one is in crisis? You may not fully know. Ordinary connection made of shared interest, play, mutual curiosity, and enjoyment, can feel strangely thin. Nothing is wrong, nothing needs solving, and some part of you does not understand why you are there. This is not a failure of love, it is the consequence of having practiced one register of connection almost exclusively. Mutuality demands a different capacity. It asks you to remain present when you do not have a job. Presence without a job is more exposing than helping ever was. When you are helping, attention flows safely outward. When you are simply with another person, there is no function standing between you and their perception. You are the one being encountered. The rescuer role may have exhausted you, but it also concealed you. As long as someone needed saving, no one had to ask what you wanted, what disappointed you, what gave you pleasure, or what kind of person appeared when usefulness was no longer directing the scene. This concealment was rarely chosen consciously. It formed because it worked. Being needed created reliable proximity without requiring the risk of being known. You could become essential to someone while remaining almost entirely absent from the relationship as a separate person. This is the hidden bargain inside rescuing. You would never be abandoned for being useless, because you would never allow yourself to become useless. In return, you would never discover whether you could be loved without earning your position. When the crises stop, this bargain becomes visible. The evening gives back more than free time. It gives back the possibility of being seen without a function, which may be the very possibility the role spent years helping you avoid. Jung's idea of the self does not offer a simple replacement identity here. The self is not a hidden, completed personality waiting beneath the rescuer costume. It is the larger movement of the psyche toward a life in which the useful, needy, generous, angry, strong and uncertain parts no longer have to exile one another. That movement does not begin with a dramatic revelation. It begins in the disorientation of having no role to perform. It begins when the old identity is no longer constantly confirmed and nothing equally convincing has arrived to replace it. This is why the quiet evening feels heavier than it should. It is not merely the absence of purpose. It is the first encounter with a life that may no longer be organized entirely around psychological necessity. There is no immediate answer to the question of who you are when no one needs to be saved. Any answer produced too quickly would probably become another role. The rescuer would simply return under a different name, perhaps as the person who is now exceptionally healed, independent, or self-aware. For now, there is only the room, the silent phone, the shoulders slowly discovering that nothing is about to fall upon them, the faint impulse to reach outward and make yourself necessary, followed by the unfamiliar recognition that the impulse does not have to decide what happens next. Nothing remarkable replaces it. No hidden identity steps forward fully formed. There is only an ordinary evening in which no one is drowning, and a person who has not yet learned who they are without the water. But for the first time, that person has remained in the room long enough to be encountered. Remaining in the room for one evening did not transform you. The following nights still found you reaching for something to do, and the something was almost always reasonable. That is what makes the pattern so difficult to recognize from inside it. Nothing you chose looked like an escape. There was a message you had meant to answer, a small task that had been waiting for a week, a call to your mother that was, in fairness, overdue. Each action could be defended on its own. Each one arrived at precisely the moment the unoccupied space began to expose you. The evidence was not in what you chose, but in the speed with which you chose it. An open hour produced a low pressure, and something in you moved to relieve that pressure before you had consciously experienced it as discomfort. By the time the explanation appeared, the escape had already begun. This is how an identity protects itself. It does not announce that it is afraid of disappearing. It finds something useful to do. The arrangement had not formed out of nothing. It was constructed gradually because it worked. Somewhere along the way, being the person who handled things stopped being one of your capacities and became the primary way you recognized yourself. The role followed you into work. Even if your profession had nothing to do with caring, it always found suitable material. You became the colleague people brought unfinished problems to, the person who noticed instability before it became visible, the one who quietly prevented things from falling apart. Most of this labor was never formally acknowledged because successful prevention leaves almost no evidence. When rescue works, the crisis does not happen. Other people see an ordinary day while you carry the private knowledge of everything the day nearly became. This creates a peculiar hunger. If your value is built from disasters that did not occur, you require a continuous supply of possible disasters in order to feel that your value still exists. The role does not merely tolerate instability around it. At a level you may dislike admitting, it depends upon instability for confirmation. This is not an accusation against your character. It is a description of a psychological economy. A person who has been paid in one currency for most of a lifetime will feel the loss when that currency stops circulating. Even when the currency itself was exhaustion, the same economy entered your friendships. The people who remained closest were often the people who required something from you. They were not necessarily exploitative, and you were not consciously selecting them for their wounds. They simply recognized a capacity in you, and need naturally moved toward what appeared able to contain it. Meanwhile, another kind of person tended to drift away. These were the people who were doing reasonably well. They wanted to discuss a film, wander through a market, sit over coffee, or spend an afternoon without turning it into confession. They offered companionship, but little for you to repair. You may have interpreted them as shallow. Perhaps you told yourself that you preferred intensity, honesty, and emotional depth. That interpretation was not entirely false, but it protected you from a more unsettling recognition. You knew how to enter another person's suffering more easily than you knew how to enter their ordinary life. Difficulty gave connection a structure. One person disclosed, the other understood. One person became disorganized, the other remained calm. Each knew their position, and because the positions were clear, closeness could occur without the uncertainty of mutual exposure. Ordinary companionship offered no such arrangement. No one was more fragile. No one was more necessary. There was nothing to stabilize, and therefore no obvious reason that your presence should matter more than anyone else's. This is where the rescuer's shadow becomes more complicated than exhaustion or suppressed anger. The shadow contains not only the needs you were forbidden to express, but also your investment in remaining the one who was less needy. There was dignity in the role, but there was also protection as long as the other person was the one falling apart. You could remain the coherent one as long as their life occupied the conversation. No one had to look too closely at yours. You may even have felt an irritation you could not explain when someone refused your help, recovered without you, or continued making the same choices after receiving your advice. The irritation was easy to call concern. Sometimes it was concern, but sometimes another wound had been touched. If they did not use what you offered, your usefulness could not complete itself. If they became well, the relationship might lose the very structure that had made you important within it. Their recovery was something you consciously desired, yet some hidden part of you feared what their recovery would remove. Two opposing truths could therefore exist at once. You genuinely wanted them to become free, and you did not know who you would be to them once they were. The conscious personality held the first truth. The second remained in shadow because it conflicted with the goodness on which your identity depended. This does not mean your love was secretly manipulation. It means no human motive is as pure and singular as the persona requires it to appear. Love can contain generosity and fear. Care can contain devotion and the need to remain indispensable. Jungian psychology begins where the flattering explanation is no longer allowed to describe the whole psyche. The family system had given this arrangement its earliest shape. There, the position was not developed so much as silently assigned. Someone became the one who absorbed tension, anticipated reactions, or translated what the adults could not say directly. The role gave you something real in an atmosphere where your independent presence might have gone unnoticed. Usefulness made you visible. The person who absorbed the emotional weather had a place that seemed impossible to remove. You were not simply used by this arrangement. That explanation gives the child too little psychological intelligence. Some part of you recognized the strategy that produced the greatest available security and became exceptionally skilled at it. The choice was not free in any adult sense. A child does not stand outside the family and compare identities, but the psyche moves toward whatever protects attachment. And yours discovered that competence was safer than need. The strategy worked. It secured proximity. It produced gratitude. It made you difficult to discard. Most importantly, it made the question of whether you were wanted almost unnecessary. Being needed has one enormous advantage over being loved. It is verifiable. Love asks you to trust something you cannot measure, while need announces itself repeatedly. It rings the phone, creates a task, and returns tomorrow with further evidence. For someone raised inside unpredictable emotional weather, verifiability is not a small comfort. It is the difference between standing on a floor and waiting for the floor to disappear. The rescuer role was not vanity, it was architecture. But every structure preserves certain forms of life by excluding others. This architecture made generous service possible, but it contained no room in which your own need could be received. The person who handled everything could not also be the person who required handling. To occupy the second position would have threatened the first, and the first appeared to hold the entire building upright. so your difficulty became private. You managed it with the same competence you brought to everyone else's life. You organized your grief, contained your fear, and found explanations for your exhaustion that did not require another person to change anything. Eventually, you may have stopped experiencing the absence of witness as deprivation. The wish to be witnessed had gone unused for so long that it no longer arrived as a conscious desire. What had never been expected could not easily be recognized as missing. The body sometimes kept a different record. Fatigue appeared before certain conversations had even begun. The throat tightened when someone asked how you were, because the truthful answer threatened to alter the familiar direction of care. Before thought could intervene, your mouth prepared the version that required nothing from them. Fine, busy. The usual, each answer was true enough to pass, and incomplete enough to preserve the arrangement. The reassurance did more than protect the other person from concern. It protected you from discovering how they might respond if concern were actually required. Some might have moved toward you, some might have become uncomfortable, others might have listened briefly and then returned the conversation to themselves. As long as you offered the manageable version, these possibilities remained untested. That uncertainty was another reason usefulness felt safer than mutuality. When you gave, you knew what happened next. When you needed, you entered a territory in which the other person was free to reveal the limits of their love. Now the structure is weakening, and that is what makes this stage difficult rather than simply liberating. The rescuer identity is not being replaced by a stronger, healthier identity. For a time, it is being replaced by nothing. You cannot fully return to the person who was oriented by every external emergency. Something has shifted, and the old performance no longer fits without friction. You hear yourself offering help and, for the first time, recognize the speed of the offer, but there is no completed alternative waiting behind it. No authentic self steps forward with a list of clear desires. What appears instead is an absence, and absence is nearly intolerable to a personality trained to fill whatever is empty. The old structure immediately interprets that absence as another problem. Something is missing. Therefore, something must be repaired. A new project is chosen, a new identity assembled, and the rescuer returns disguised as the person now responsible for rescuing themselves. Even psychological growth can be absorbed into the old role. You can become highly disciplined about discovering your preferences, perfectly competent at resting, or relentlessly committed to healing. The activity changes, but the inner command remains the same. Do something quickly so that uncertainty does not have to be felt. Yet uncertainty is not necessarily evidence that the psyche has failed to produce an answer. It may be the first space that has not already been assigned a function. The people around you have not necessarily changed. Requests still arrive. Problems still find their way toward the person who has always known how to hold them. But the requests begin landing differently because something in you now pauses where it once moved automatically. The pause may be no longer than half a second. It is not a dramatic refusal, and no boundary has to be announced. It is simply the moment in which the automatic yes fails to complete itself. That half second contains an unfamiliar form of consciousness. You can feel the difference between being able to help believing you should help and actually wanting to help. For most of your life, these three experiences were compressed into one. The new information is rarely clear. Sometimes the answer is a warm and uncomplicated yes. Sometimes it is reluctance mixed with affection. Sometimes it is resentment, tenderness, guilt, and willingness arriving together. The purpose is not to obey whichever feeling speaks first. That would merely replace one automatic authority with another. What matters is that the feelings now exist within awareness and no longer have to disappear before the role begins. This changes the meaning of care. A role that operates before consciousness is a structure. A role that passes through consciousness can become a choice. Choice initially feels less noble because it admits that you could have done otherwise. It removes the heroic necessity from your generosity, but it also makes something possible that compulsory care could never provide. You may help without secretly requiring the other person to remain helpless. You may give without turning their dependence into proof of your existence. You may remain beside someone without making their crisis the foundation of your relationship. The old identity understood love as the inability to leave another person unsupported. Something quieter is beginning to emerge. Now, the possibility of offering care without using care to disappear. And this raises the question the rescuer has never been free enough to ask. If you are no longer helping because your identity depends upon it, what becomes possible when the help is given simply because you want to give it? The answer appears simple at first. If helping is no longer compulsory, then perhaps it can become a freer expression of love. But the first time you help someone deliberately, after the pause, something unexpected happens. The gratitude arrives, and it does not land with the force it once did. You care about what you have done. You may even be glad you did it. Yet, the evening does not close with the old feeling that your existence has been fully accounted for. Something is missing from the exchange, and the absence creates suspicion. That flatness reveals something important. The helping was never carrying care alone. It was also carrying confirmation, protection, and position. Now that the act has passed through choice, it can no longer provide all three with the same intensity. The rescuing felt meaningful partly because it placed you on the side of the person who did not need rescue. Every time you became the strong one in the room, you quietly confirmed that you were not the exposed one. The gesture moved outward, but it also protected something inward. This does not make your love false. Love and protection can travel inside the same act without canceling one another. The conscious personality may act from devotion, while another part of the psyche uses that devotion to remain hidden. The role reliably prevented certain possibilities. It prevented another person from asking questions you could not answer. It kept your needs outside the field of attention. Most of all, it fixed the direction in which vulnerability was permitted to travel. The other person could reach toward you. You rarely had to reach toward them. They could reveal their uncertainty while you remained the one capable of containing it. The direction looked generous, but a fixed direction is also a form of control. You may have thought of yourself as the least controlling person in your relationships. You adapted, accommodated, and made room for almost everyone. Yet, your availability guaranteed one important thing: you would rarely have to discover what happened when you asked for something and another person was free to refuse. This is the shadow inside the virtue. It is not secret selfishness concealed beneath kindness. It is a fear of exposure that found a morally beautiful place to live. The structure was psychologically intelligent. If earlier experience had taught you that need might be ignored, mocked, mishandled, or used against you, then a life in which you never had to test another person's response offered enormous protection. You did not overcome dependence. You organized your relationships so that dependence would usually belong to someone else. Jung understood that a one-sided conscious identity does not eliminate its opposite. It drives that opposite into shadow. The more completely you became the capable one, the more your helplessness, longing, and uncertainty had to disappear from your image of yourself. But what disappears from conscious identity does not disappear from life. It is often encountered through other people. The need you could not tolerate in yourself became the need you knew exactly how to recognize, soothe, and manage in them. This does not mean that their suffering was invented by you. Their need was real. What mattered was how naturally it found a place within your psychological arrangement, and how readily you became indispensable to the people who could carry the vulnerability your persona had excluded. The relationship then divided the human condition between two people. They became the one who needed. You became the one who could bear need. Each person occupied a partial position, and the bond remained stable as long as neither crossed the invisible line. This helps explain why another person's recovery could produce feelings that seemed unworthy of you. You wanted them to become well. At the same time, their independence removed the mirror in which your strength had been reflected. When they no longer needed your guidance, gratitude, or emotional steadiness, you did not merely lose a task. You lost the position from which you had safely related to them. The relationship was now required to survive without its original architecture. Two truths could therefore exist at once. You could genuinely desire their freedom and still feel displaced by it. Conscious goodness held the first truth. The shadow carried the second, because the rescuer persona could not admit to needing anyone's dependence. That contradiction is not evidence of concealed cruelty. It is evidence that the psyche is larger than the moral image through which the ego recognizes itself. Individuation begins when both truths can be held without turning either of them into the whole person. The loss of the old emotional reward also explains why deliberate helping can initially feel less satisfying. The act may still express love, but it no longer provides the same escape from uncertainty. It no longer proves that you are stronger, safer, or less needy than the person receiving it. Care becomes quieter when it stops carrying identity. It may even feel disappointingly ordinary. You do something kind, the other person appreciates it, and no private transformation follows. The gesture ends without telling you who you are. This quietness can be mistaken for diminished compassion. In reality, what has diminished is the psychological payment attached to compassion. The care remains, but the confirmation is no longer guaranteed. That leaves you facing the question the old role prevented, whether you are wanted rather than merely useful. You possess years of evidence that people value what you can do. You have far less evidence about whether they would remain interested in the person who sometimes has nothing to offer. Usefulness can be measured. It produces outcomes, gratitude, and repeated requests. Being wanted cannot be verified in the same way. It asks you to trust an attachment that may not constantly announce itself. This is why receiving becomes more difficult than sacrifice. Sacrifice preserves the familiar position. Receiving reverses the direction of the relationship and places you where the other person has always been. Someone does something for you, and the psyche moves to close the opening as quickly as possible. The thank you arrives too fast and carries too much force. Almost immediately, an internal ledger records what must be returned. Then comes the search for repayment, preferably at slightly greater value. Once you have given back more than you received, the balance feels safe again. You are restored to the position of giver, and the debt of having been cared for disappears. You were not receiving, you were neutralizing. A gift that remains a gift places you in a psychological position you have little experience holding. Something has reached you that you did not earn, predict, or control until it is repaid. You remain visible as someone to whom care was given simply because another person wanted to give it. This can feel more exposing than asking for help. Asking, at least, provides the dignity of initiating the exchange. An unsolicited gift confronts you with the possibility that another person was thinking of you while you were performing no useful function at all. The body often refuses before the mind understands what is occurring. Someone offers assistance, and the chest braces. A sentence forms before the offer is complete. It is fine. I have it. Do not worry about me. The sentence sounds reassuring. It may even sound considerate. Yet it is also a warm refusal that prevents the other person from entering your life in the way you have entered theirs. Some of the people who love you have felt this refusal for years without knowing how to name it. They know your generosity. They also know that every attempt to care for you is redirected, minimized, or repaid before intimacy can form around it. This creates a peculiar loneliness on both sides. You feel unseen despite giving constantly. They feel kept at a distance despite being trusted with your company. Everyone may call the relationship close, yet only one person is permitted to arrive empty-handed. The loneliness did not come from coldness. It came from an excess of giving so complete that no one could reach you from the opposite direction. This is one of the more painful reversals in the rescuer's awakening. What appeared to guarantee connection was also controlling its limits. By needing nothing, you protected yourself from disappointment, but you also prevented others from discovering how to respond to the parts of you that were not already composed. Receiving, therefore, requires more than accepting practical help. It requires allowing another person's response to remain outside your control. They may give imperfectly, they may misunderstand, they may offer less than you hoped, or more than you know how to hold. This uncertainty is precisely what the rescuer role eliminated. When you were always the giver, you could decide how much entered the relationship, how well it was delivered, and when the exchange was complete, dependence belonged elsewhere, and so did the risk. The same structure governs rest. An unearned evening feels faintly illegitimate because it places you on the receiving side of time. Nothing has been sacrificed for it. No exhaustion has purchased it. The hours arrive without asking you to justify why they should belong to you. Guilt then suggests that something is being neglected. Someone, somewhere, could benefit from your attention while you are sitting here. The person remains unspecified because the accusation is not coming from a real emergency. It is coming from an identity that interprets unused capacity as moral failure. Peace can therefore feel less like peace than like negligence. Without urgency, vigilance begins searching for what has been missed. When it finds nothing, the absence itself becomes suspicious. The unease may remain, but it gradually loses its status as instruction. It becomes a sensation rather than a command. Nothing has to be invented merely because the machinery of usefulness has gone quiet. Only then do small preferences become perceptible again. They do not arrive as powerful declarations of desire. They appear as mild curiosity, a faint interest or a slight pull toward one possibility rather than another. The rescuer once dismissed these signals because they did not pass the test of necessity. Yet, a preference is meaningful precisely because it is unnecessary. It belongs to a life that is not being organized entirely around survival, duty, or repair. The deeper difficulty is not simply that you have forgotten what you enjoy, it is that enjoyment places you among ordinary people. It carries no heroic function and establishes no special position. You become one person among others, choosing something because it pleases you rather than because you alone can bear its weight. The strength was real. You did bear what others could not, but being the one who could bear everything also placed you above the situation. And above is a form of separation. You were never entirely in the room with them. You were holding the room. There is grief in surrendering that position. It carried dignity. It made suffering intelligible and gave purpose to years that might otherwise have felt merely painful. Setting it down can feel like becoming smaller. The psyche may experience equality as demotion. To become an ordinary person with ordinary limits and ordinary needs means relinquishing the exceptional status granted by endurance. You are no longer the one outside the human difficulty, organizing it for everyone else. You are inside it with them. You may even miss the crises, not as a conscious wish for anyone to suffer, but as a faint attraction to the intensity in which you once felt most real. Calm can seem thin after a lifetime in which emotional urgency supplied meaning, intimacy, and identity at once. Something more intense was happening then, but intensity and reality are not the same. They were fused for so long that ordinary life now has to be encountered repeatedly before it begins to feel sufficient. None of this feels like progress while it is occurring. It feels like less certainty, less importance, and less clarity about why you are here. But the subtraction is not removing your capacity to love. It is removing the requirement that love prove your right to exist. What remains is not yet a new identity. It is smaller and stranger than that. A person who can receive something without immediately repaying it. A person who can sit among others without holding the room together. And for the first time, the care moving toward that person is not payment for what they have carried. It is allowed to reach them before they have earned it. The change becomes visible to other people before it becomes comfortable to you. Someone mentions it lightly, almost as a joke. You have been quieter lately. You do not call as often. Beneath the lightness is a question they are not yet willing to ask directly. They are not imagining it. You have become less automatically available, not because you announced a policy or decided to withdraw from everyone, but because the reaching has slowed. Anyone who relied upon that reaching can feel the difference. Some people will call it change and mean the word kindly. Others will experience it as distance. A few may say you have become selfish, and the accusation will land harder than it should because it names precisely the failure you spent your life arranging never to commit. For most of your life, selfishness was not merely an undesirable trait, it was the shadow against which your entire acceptable identity had been constructed. To be generous was to remain good. To be needed was to remain innocent. Any movement toward yourself, therefore, carried the threat of becoming the person you had worked so hard never to be. This is why the accusation can awaken guilt even when no wrongdoing has occurred. It does not have to convince your adult mind. It only has to touch the old equation in which self-consideration meant danger to belonging. Yet the accusation is not always a moral judgment. Often it is the sound another person makes when a form of care they had never needed to request is no longer arriving automatically. Something reliable has changed, and they experience the change before they understand its meaning. That does not necessarily make them exploitative. Most people adapt unconsciously to the emotional arrangements available to them. If one person always remembers, initiates, reassures, and repairs, the others gradually stop recognizing those acts as choices. Reliability becomes part of the environment. They may also genuinely miss you. Missing your function and missing your person are not mutually exclusive. The two were fused for so long that the people around you may have no more ability to separate them than you once did. Their confusion may contain affection, dependency, disappointment, and entitlement at the same time. Integration does not require reducing them to one motive. It asks only that their reaction no longer become the sole authority on who you must be. Some relationships will thin out. This deserves to be said plainly. Connections sustained primarily by your capacity to absorb, organize, or repair will have less, holding them together when that capacity becomes intermittent. The silence that follows may hurt more than the original demands did. While you were useful, the relationship felt continuous. Once the usefulness is withdrawn, you may discover how little mutual life had developed underneath it. The loss will be real, so will the relief that sometimes accompanies it. Relief does not prove that you never loved the person. It is what the body feels when a weight it had stopped registering is finally removed. Grief and relief may occupy the same moment. One part of you mourns the relationship, another recognizes that the relationship required a version of you that could not continue. Neither feeling cancels the other. Other relationships will survive, but they may become awkward before they become mutual. A friend who once called only in crisis may begin telling you about an ordinary week. Without pain organizing the conversation, neither of you may know where intimacy is supposed to come from. At first, the exchange can feel weightless. Nothing important appears to be happening. Then something unfamiliar becomes perceptible. You are not managing their emotional state, and they are not using distress as the price of admission. You are simply spending time together. You may discover that you have opinions in these conversations, a place you would rather eat, a film you do not want to see, a subject you wish to continue instead of abandoning it the moment the other person loses interest. The first few times you say one of these things aloud, A half second of exposure follows. You have entered the relationship as a person with a position rather than as an accommodation. The other person may agree, disagree, or remain indifferent, and the relationship does not necessarily collapse. That ordinary continuation can feel almost anticlimactic. The psyche expected self-assertion to produce rupture because earlier belonging depended upon your ability to adapt. Instead, a preference enters the room, and the room remains standing. There may also be a day when someone offers you something and you accept without producing a counteroffer. No repayment is scheduled. No invisible ledger opens. You say thank you, and the afternoon continues. The significance may not register until hours later. A small internal jolt appears, as though you have escaped with something that does not rightfully belong to you. What has actually happened is simpler. Care reached you without first passing through usefulness. These changes do not resemble transformation. They arrive as moments too ordinary to impress anyone watching. A pause before a yes, an honest preference, a gift that remains a gift, a conversation in which no one becomes patient and no one becomes rescuer, because the old role is no longer automatic. Another danger appears. The psyche can attempt to escape the rescuer identity by constructing its opposite. You may feel tempted to become the person who no longer helps anyone, who treats every request as intrusion and every dependency as manipulation. Refusal can become as rigid as availability once was. The words change, but the one-sidedness remains. The new persona may appear stronger because it speaks the language of boundaries, self-respect and independence. Yet if every yes once protected you from abandonment, every no can begin protecting you from intimacy. Both positions eliminate uncertainty by deciding in advance who you must be. Jungian integration does not ask the rescuer to become indifferent. It does not cure one extreme by idealizing the other. The task is more difficult because it offers no permanent rule. Sometimes another person truly needs you, and love will ask something costly. Sometimes the request belongs to a pattern that can continue only if you abandon yourself. Sometimes you will help gladly, sometimes you will refuse and still feel sorrow about refusing. No single response proves that you are healed, selfish, generous, or free. The old identity wanted every act to settle the question of who you were. A more integrated life allows the meaning of an act to belong to the situation rather than to a permanent moral identity. The capacity you built has not disappeared. Someone in real trouble may call, and you may still be the person who knows how to enter the confusion without becoming confused by it. That capacity is genuine, valuable, and worth preserving. What changes is that you come back, you help, and then return to a life that contains more than the aftermath of another person's emergency. Their crisis does not occupy your inner world for the following 3 weeks. You do not continue rehearsing what they should do, monitoring whether they have done it, or carrying the consequence of choices that remain theirs. Returning does not make the original care smaller. It gives the care an edge. Their life remains connected to yours without becoming indistinguishable from it. This differentiation lies near the center of individuation. It is not separation in the sense of emotional exile. It is the gradual discovery that closeness does not require psychic fusion. And love does not require one person to become the function through which another person survives. The old role gave you a clear answer to why you existed. What replaces it is not a better answer. It is the decreasing need for the question to be answered every hour. For a while, that can feel like a loss of significance. A life organized around rescue carries drama, direction, and measurable consequence. An ordinary life may appear smaller because no one's survival is continually confirming its importance. This feeling is not proof that the quieter life is empty. It is the residue of a system that measured meaning through intensity, and intensity was always greatest when someone was going under. Other forms of meaning become audible slowly, an interest with no useful application, an afternoon allowed to change direction, a conversation that is enjoyable rather than important. None produces the unmistakable confirmation once delivered by crisis. Their smallness is part of what makes them difficult to trust. They do not tell you that you are indispensable. They merely allow you to be present. Over time, the room with nothing required of you changes. It does not become thrilling. The expectation that it should become thrilling would merely assign it another task. It becomes something quieter than exciting. It becomes habitable. You remain perceptive. You still notice the slight change in someone's voice, the tension entering a room, and the suffering another person has not yet named. Individuation does not require destroying the sensitivity through which you learn to survive. But noticing no longer creates an automatic obligation. Perception becomes information rather than command. You can recognize another person's pain without immediately turning their pain into your responsibility. This distinction will never be perfect. There will be moments when guilt arrives during an ordinary hour that belongs only to you. It may suggest that someone, somewhere, is being neglected because your attention has returned to your own life. The guilt has not necessarily become wiser. It has simply become familiar. It no longer carries the same power to convert every feeling into an action. There will also be moments when guilt contains real information. You may withdraw too abruptly. You may use new psychological language to avoid a conversation that genuinely belongs to you. You may call something a boundary when it is partly retaliation. Freedom does not mean treating every uncomfortable feeling as residue from the past. It means being able to examine guilt without automatically obeying it and without automatically dismissing it. Sometimes it belongs to the old role. Sometimes it belongs to responsibility. The difference must be discovered each time. This uncertainty is more demanding than the rescuer identity ever was. The role provided a fixed answer: help, accommodate, remain. Without it, you must tolerate moral complexity. You can care and still decline. You can leave and still love. You can help and still refuse to become necessary. You may continue missing the position everyone once assigned you. There was dignity in being the one they trusted. Losing that place is a real loss, even when the place also consumed you. A person is permitted to grieve a role that kept them from themselves. The psyche does not surrender a lifelong identity simply because consciousness has discovered its cost. It remembers what the role protected, what it made possible, and how much belonging once depended upon it. On certain nights, your hand may still reach for the phone before you know whose name you expect to see. The old reflex may never fully disappear. Its persistence is not evidence that nothing changed. It is the bodily memory of a life organized for a long time around other people's emergencies. The difference lies in what follows. The reaching becomes visible. The phone returns to the table. No imaginary crisis needs to be created merely to restore your position in the world. The evening continues without anyone being saved. Sitting there, you may still be unable to say who you are. No final identity has arrived to replace the rescuer. And perhaps that is not a failure of discovery. Perhaps the demand for a final definition belonged to the same structure that required every hour to prove its value. The self, in Jung's sense, is not another title the ego can wear. It is the larger life that becomes possible when no single role is forced to represent the whole personality. The rescuer remains within that life, but no longer governs it. So do the one who needs, the one who refuses, the one who receives, the one who rests, and the one who sometimes has nothing meaningful to offer. Who are you when no one needs to be saved? For a long time, the absence of an answer felt like disappearance. Now it begins to feel like room. Something may emerge within it, or nothing may emerge tonight. Neither outcome has to justify the hour. You are no longer waiting for an emergency to tell you that you exist. The room has stopped waiting to be justified. And slowly, so have you.
This has been Carl Jung Original, a space where the patterns most people live through can finally be named. Voice and imagery, AI-assisted interpretation and framing, original work. Until next lecture.